There's my phone. Okay, hey y'all. Hey. Today's lesson is solving quadratic equations.
Alright, so first step in solving a quadratic equation is you want to set the equation equal to 0. Then you're going to factor the polynomial. Then you're going to solve your two factors for x, so you should have two answers hopefully. And you're going to check by plugging them in.
And when we say zero product property, the zero product property is very simple. It says that if you have two factors, a times b, and that equals 0, then either a has to equal 0 or b has to equal 0. One of the factors has to equal 0 if you're multiplying to get 0. And then the solutions, they're going to be, with quadratics, you could have three different types of solutions.
So the first one is, if your parabola, if you graph it, and your parabola only touches the x-axis in one point, then you're going to have one solution. If you graph and your parabola crosses the x-axis twice, then you're going to have two solutions. If your parabola never touches the x-axis, then you have no solution.
And the solutions are sometimes called zeros or roots, because the reason it's called 0 is because we're setting it equal to 0. Where does it touch the x-axis? And that is called your solution, that's called your 0, and then sometimes you might hear them called roots, because these are quadratics. They're going to have that x squared, and then the inverse of an x squared is a square root. So you might see them say, find the roots, find the zeros, find the solutions.
So typically, before we move it, the solution to a quadratic equation is where your parabola crosses the x-axis. That's also known as your x-intercept.
Alright, so copy these examples down. We have 6 examples for you today. Copy them down, and then we are going to show you how to solve them. So first we look for a GCF. We do not have a GCF, so we need to factor. I've already put the two first and last factors in the box, so now we need to find the factors of 32 that add to be 12. And I know Ms. Barnes' class, you list the factors, right, at 32. So what are the factors of 32 that if you add them together you would get 12? And the answers are 8 and 4. So we would put 8x here, 4x here. And then you factor out the greatest common factor. So for here it would be x, over here it would be 8.
Over here would be x, and down here it would be 4. So your two factors are x plus 4 times x plus 8. And this is where you want to set it equal to 0.
So the only part that's new to you is the setting it equal to 0. The factoring we've done, so we set it equal to 0. That's how you solve it.
So then to solve it, because we have two factors, that means you're going to have two answers. So you would do x plus 4 equals 0 and solve for x. So subtract 4 on both sides. So you have x equals negative 4. And then you would take this factor and set it equal to 0 and solve for x. So you would end up with x equals negative 8. So your two solutions are x equals negative 4 and x equals negative 8.
And the reason Ms. Barnes took them each and she set this one equal to 0 and this one equal to 0 because of the zero product property. One of those has to equal 0 in order for the product to be 0. And then we just need to check them. So we're going to plug them back into our calculator and make sure they equal 0. So negative 4 squared plus 12 times negative 4 plus 32, and that equals 0. So I'm just plugging the number in. Then I'm going to plug in negative 8. So negative 8 squared plus 12 times negative 8 plus 32, and the answer is 0. So that means if we were to graph this equation in your calculator, it would be a parabola that crosses the x-axis at, let's go this way, negative 4 and negative 8. And it would be like that.
Alright, number 2, x squared minus 9x plus 14. First thing when you're factoring is you want to check the GCF. And we don't have one for all three terms. So then you're going to, because it's a trinomial, you go to your box method. So what will multiply to give me 14 but add to give me negative 9? Those answers are negative 7 and negative 2. Negative 7 times negative 2 multiplies to be positive 14 but adds to be negative 9. So then you want to take out your GCF. Going this way is x, and going this way it will be negative 2.
Going up and down, it would be x, and right here it would be negative 7.
So our factors are x minus 2 times x minus 7. And then you want to set
it equal
both factors equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0 would end up being x equals 2. And x minus 7 equals 0 would end up being x equals 7. So then you check your work. Check when you plug in 2, will you get this equation equal to 0?
All right, and I typed in 2 and 2 works, and now I'm going to type in 7. And that works. So that means they're both solutions. Those are both considered zeros of our quadratic equation. All right, number 3, if you can see, it's written a little differently. Number 3 already has an equal something. But the very first step is setting it equal to 0. So we need to move the 3 back over to the other side, so I'll have a 0.
So what do we need to do to 3 to make this side equal to 0? You just subtract 3 on both sides. It goes away. We can't combine this 3 with any of these because it's not like terms, so we rewrite it as 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 equals 0. So now we're going to factor the trinomial. They don't have anything in common, so there's no GCF. And then in your box method, you're going to do 2 times negative 3, so it has to multiply to be negative 6, but add to be negative 5. And those factors are going to be negative 6x and positive 1x. So then you're going to take your GCF. Going this way, you have x, and going this way, you actually have negative 3.
Going vertical, we have 2x. And right here, 1x and negative 3, then the only factor they have is a 1.
So then your factors now are 2x plus 1 times x minus 3 equals 0. And set both parentheses equal to 0, so you're going to solve for x in this one first. If you subtract 1 on both sides, you end up with 2x equals negative 1. Divide by 2, so I'm put over here x would equal negative 1/2. Then over here, x minus 3 equals 0 would end up being x equals positive 3. And you have to check these two answers.
Right. To save time, we're not going to spend time checking them, but you would type them in and just check them on your calculator. So number 4, we look for a GCF. There's not one. We set it equal to 0. And then we have to multiply the a value times the c value, and we get negative 15. So we need to find the factors that multiply to give us negative 15, but when we add them, we have a positive 14. And for those factors, it's going to be 15 and negative 1. So 15x and then negative 1x.
All right, so going this way, your GCF would be 3x. And going this way, your GCF would be negative 1.
Vertically, we have a GCF of x, and we have a GCF of 5. Because remember, you take the sign of the first box that you come to. So this one is positive, and right here, this is negative.
And so I've already written the factors out. It's 3x minus 1 times x plus 5 equals 0. To solve for the x's, you're going to set both parentheses equal to 0. So 3x minus 1 equals 0. To save time, I'm just going to tell you that's going to be 1/3. And this one would be negative 5. And you're just solving for x like you did in all the other examples, and then you're going to check your work.
Okay. All right, so in number 5, you see we have an equals 8 instead of an equals 0. And Ms. Barnes showed that you would subtract 8 on both sides. Then you can rewrite that trinomial equal to 0. And then when we look for a GCF, I don't see one. So we multiply a times c and we get negative 88. And it has to add to be negative 18. And I'm thinking it's going to be 22 and 4. We just have to decide which one needs to be negative.
So because the 18 has to be negative, that means the bigger number will need to be negative if we're adding. Alright, so your GCF this way is positive 11x because this first box is positive. And then this way is a positive 4 because the first box is positive.
Alright, so vertically we have a greatest common factor of x. And right here we have a greatest common factor of negative 2 because this is negative. That's what will go into both of them.
And then x minus 2, set both of them equal to 0. So when we do 11x plus 4 equals 0, we end up with x equals negative 4 over 11. And here when we do x minus 2 equals 0, we end up with x equals 2. And then you would check both of these answers to see if they actually equal 0. Just in case we haven't practiced, but if one of them doesn't, then that means it's not a real solution to the quadratic. You would only have one solution. And you can check that by graphing it in your calculator to see how many times it crosses.
So number 6. This one, it does have a greatest common factor, so I went ahead and showed you the greatest common factor would be 2. So the leftovers would be x squared plus 6x minus 16. And I wanted to show you in this one what you do when you have a greatest common factor. So we'll talk about that in a moment. In our box, x squared and negative 16. So the factors of negative 16 that add to give you 6 are going to be a positive 8x and a negative 2x.
And so I'll pull out the GCFs. You have x here and negative 2 here. On top you would have x, and on the bottom you would have, 8. Sorry. So your factors, remember to bring down your GCF, is 2 times x minus 2 times x plus 8 equals 0.
Okay, so then you're going to set your factors equal to 0 again. And you're going to have, 2 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, and x plus 8 equals 0. Now, 2 equals 0. Can 2 equal 0? No. So that is not going to be a solution. You can't have 2 equals 0. X minus 2 equals 0 means that x is equal to 2. So 2 minus 2 is 0. And x plus 8 equals 0 means x is equal to negative 8 because a negative 8 plus 8 is equal to 0. So if you do have to pull out a GCF, you keep it down on the side, you set it equal to 0, and then you determine if it's true or if it's false or what you're going to do with it.
So then you would plug in 2 to see if it actually works. So we'll do this one since it has a GCF.
Yeah.
So 2.
Oh, you want me to check it? Sorry.
Yeah, let's check it.
Okay.
2 times 2 squared plus 12 times 2 minus 32 does equal 0. So this one works. Great minds think alike. And then 2 times negative 8 squared plus 12 times negative 8 minus 32 also equals 0. So this one works as well.
So these are the two solutions. These are the two zeros to this quadratic equation. So remember, set it equal to 0, factor it, and then each of your parentheses you're going to set equal to 0. And that's how you solve quadratics.